Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Low Production Value Sphere podcast, which, as always, is shot from my terrorist hideout in the north of Mali. I have a very special guest with me tonight. It's Ryan Anderson, who is the president of the Ethics and Public Policy Center, and as such, my former boss. I was affiliated with EPPC for many years under the reigns of various dictators over there. Uh, this is a complete joke because joking aside, EPPC is a wonderful place, and it has particularly been extremely good to me. And so I'm always happy to talk about EPPC. You were great to me as president. Ed before that was great to me. I was purely joking. Um, so anyway, so you just see we're already starting to laugh here. So I got in touch with you. I mean, obviously we stay in touch, but I got in touch with you because you recently published the annual report for 2024, and I thought that would be a good excuse to do an interview. We did one last year, I think, after the one
Yep.
before that, and it was a print interview. Well, print, internet, words on a page,
Pixels.
pixels. And I thought, well, we could do the same thing, but with the podcast.
Yep.
Um, so I guess the first question is for anybody who doesn't know, what is EPPC? What is the Ethics and Public Policy Center, and why is it different from other Washington think tanks people may have heard about?
Sure. So, we're one of the DC-based think tanks. I think a couple of things that make us unique, and I should add, next year we'll celebrate our 50th anniversary.
Oh wow,
Right around this
yeah,
time.
you're right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
Yeah, 'cause we were founded on the 200th anniversary of America. So the year
right.
1976, and so 2026 will be America's 250th, and it'll be our 50th. I think a couple of things make us unique. One is that we're explicitly religious. A lot of the DC-based think tanks are more or less secular, and they might have had like one or two people that happen to be religious, but they certainly don't have any like programs in religious thought. Um, Whereas, like for us, George Weigel was our second. Actually, I should go back from the beginning. Our founder was Ernest Lefebvre, who was a very serious Protestant thinker, and like the whole point of EPPC's founding was partly to combat to Protestant liberalism, Protestant progressivism, the watering down of the Protestant churches, and then it was also to be like a Cold War think tank that would defend the West on moral and ethical grounds.
Interesting.
George Weigel was then his successor, and George was president up until he really
So
started
it's
getting.
another Washington institution that was infiltrated and then taken over by Catholics.
we I wouldn't put it that way. We still strive, and our third president was a serious Jew. So and we still strive to be Protestant, Catholic, and Jewish in our DNA. For people who don't know Weigel, I mean, he was president up until he started writing A Witness to Hope, which was, the 1,000-page biography
Yes.
of John Paul II. We have a Catholic studies program. We have an evangelicals and civic life program. We don't have a Jewish studies program, but we have like serious Jews at UPBC who are working on like substantive policy questions. So I think that makes us somewhat unique in that we don't just have people of faith who happen to be at the think tank, but we actually
Right.
have programs in those respective buckets. We were also like explicitly socially conservative before it was cool to be socially conservative, if it even is cool to be socially conservative. I mean, I think a lot of the DC think tanks focused on economics and on foreign policy, and EPPC from the get-go was focused on questions of the human person, questions of morality, questions of theology, right? And so as a result, whether it's been the life debate, the marriage debate, the transgender debate, religious liberty debates, now we're seeing, technology and smartphones, social media is kind of a next wave of this. EPPC has always been engaged on things that aren't just about dollars and cents and aren't just about national security and foreign policy. Like, to my mind, part of Trump's victory in 2024 was the she's for they, them, he's for us.
Yeah.
And before I even got to EPPC, Ed Whalen was one of the first people on the legal side saying that all of this legal nonsense that the word sex now means gender identity is entirely
Right, right,
unlawful.
right.
Mary Hassan was doing a bunch of the transgender stuff at EPPC long before I arrived. And we were really on the cutting edge of that back when people thought we were going to lose the transgender debate, just like we lost the gay marriage debate, right?
Right, right.
And thankfully, that's not how history unfolded on this.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good introduction. There's another question I want to ask, and it might be silly, but this podcast has a broader audience. And that's, one of my superpowers is I'm not afraid of asking stupid questions, which is a superpower in life. So I think it's a question many people have and they're afraid to ask. What is a think tank?
Yeah,
What does a think tank do exactly? Yeah, I mean,
sure.
what is it?
Yeah, so there are different models, and I would say here's how I think about the EPPC model, and there are two images that I use for a think tank. One is a fish tank. So think about a fish tank. We have an aquarium. I'm in the basement, so we have an aquarium upstairs for our kids, and we have like fish inside of a tank, and they swim around and they do whatever fish do. So for us, like we have scholars inside of a tank, and they think their big thoughts. And for EPPC, our scholars are they shouldn't be tenured professors for the most part because it wouldn't be the best use of their time. The things that they are saying and doing are too important to be saddled with like a 4-4 teaching load. And I would say the things that we say are true, but are too controversial and politically incorrect for any of us to get tenure at most American based universities. Right? So the reason that we are housed inside of a think tank rather than the university system is that I would say we're both too controversial and we're too valuable to be trapped inside the modern American university. So that's the fish tank image. And I think some groups just have that image of what a think tank is. But I think that needs to be married with a second image, which is an army tank, right? And if you and I think we're of the same generation. For people who grew up watching GI Joe, right? This is a tank going to battle, and what I mean by that is not that like we're going to engage in like mudslinging competitions on Twitter, or that we're going to be engaged in like shenanigans that is like weaponizing, going to war. I just mean we want to be scholars who then put our scholarship into action. Right? We're not just thinking big thoughts for the sake of thinking big thoughts. The university system is knowledge for the sake of knowledge. We're knowledge for the sake of knowledge, but also action. And you can see a variety of ways in which this has been operationalized. Like, Ed Whalen is not simply writing law review articles. He found that, being very active in the blogosphere back when that first started 20 years ago, and on Twitter, is a way to really influence what the judges are doing, what the litigators are doing. And, there are a lot of people who read Ed's daily commentary at bench memos where that is having a direct impact, putting his scholarship into action to then change outcomes. This is happening in a variety of other areas where, the actually just last week during oral arguments in the case involving whether or not you can have a faith-based charter school, Sotomayor asked a question saying, "Wait, we've never before funded faith-based schools." And then the lawyer who was doing oral arguments on behalf of the faith-based charter school cites the amicus brief that we filed in that case, right? And so the thought here is, how can we package our
Right.
ideas in a way that will then make a difference for the laws, for the public policy, for us, also the culture and the church, right? So we have two audiences, both the state and the church. And everything is geared not just to being the smartest person in the room, not just thinking the big thought, but then getting that thought to make a difference, right? A concrete, tangible outcome that we can say, but for this book, this paper, this blog post, this outcome might not have happened.
Okay, that's very clear. I mean, that's you know, I've been in this space, as you know, for a very long time, and I've always been sort of fascinated by it. Most people may not know that I I was president of a student think tank when I was in law school in 2008, if you can believe that.
I didn't
And
know
that,
that.
what?
Even I didn't know that.
Yeah. Well, I'm not gonna put it in my, it's a student. It was a student thing, but I was just always fascinated by this concept, and I think one of the things that you put really well is this sort of spectrum between sort of pure scholarship and political action, trying to change policy directly, and you know when I think this is one of the things that first attracted me to EPPC, which is it feels like a place where the entire spectrum is there. And so you have some think tanks that are um they're just pure scholarship, right? We're going to pay people to sit in sit in a tank and
And
think.
think.
There was a guy on Twitter who worked for a think tank, and his bio was "sits in a tank and thinks," and I always thought that was, and they write paper and so on and so forth, and that's not a bad
No.
use of time. That's not a bad use of donor money. I mean, scholarship is intrinsically valuable. Um, but it's just one thing. And then you have some think tanks which, they have the army tank part down.
They
I'm
don't quite have
not
the
sure
think
about the
part.
think part, though. I'm not going to name anybody. People can write me angry emails to um, if you think I've unfairly targeted your institution, I will deny it. But
But also there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, there are some groups that are explicitly, we are just a grassroots activist organization, and we have, this many hundreds of thousands, if not millions of citizen activists, and we can light up your phones if you do something stupid and you're a member of Congress. We can get people to, show up at your town hall when you're campaigning in the district and say, "Wait a minute, you went to DC and you haven't done anything on the issues that you promised us." And for that, you don't need the scholarship, you need the activists, right? And so I think you're right to say that some are purely scholarship, some are purely activist. You know, we try to do a bit of both. We don't have a grassroots army, we don't have a C4, we don't have like any of the more overtly political. It's just that for us, we want to, from the get-go, when we're conceiving like what our research project is going to be, is to actually think through not just we hit publish and then we hope good things happen, but like we hit publish and then we have 3 or 4 additional steps that we're taking to make sure that this thing that we've now written actually has legs. And so for that, I mean, the challenge that I have as president is that I have to make sure that we have both really, really high standards for like intellectual credibility, because that's kind of the coin in the realm that we operate in, right? So we need our scholars to be like
right,
both doing really good work and to have a reputation for doing good work, because like the reputational part also matters. But then part two is that it also then needs to like be operationalized in a way that it moves the needle.
yeah,
And getting both of those things, it's somewhat of a unicorn. And I would say, if you look through, many of the people at EPPC, they're somewhat unicorns. I mean, to give an example, Aaron Cariotti, he's now full time with us because he was fired from his medical school job because he wouldn't take the jab. Right? He said it was unethical to force an experimental vaccine. He was the head of bioethics at his medical school. And they were going to, and he was like, I can't, like, this would violate my witness, not just my conscience, but like the witness of being a bioethics professor. But he's a unicorn in that he is well read in philosophy. He is well read in medicine. He's a practicing physician, but he can also speak to the general public in ways that ordinary people understand. And he has all of these like relationships and friends who are now occupying, high level positions in the Trump administration, where he can be a huge ally and support to them from the outside in helping them get stuff done. Right. And that's not your ordinary medical school professor. And that's certainly not like your Twitter personality who's just like dropping bombs. Like it
right.
really is a unique marriage of like expertise and operationalizing. Yeah.
That's very cool. I mean, okay, so you sort of got into the next question I was going to ask, which is how do you think about your own job in relation to this sort of spectrum we described? I mean, maybe you've already answered the question, but it's on my list, and I'm a robot, so I'm asking it
Yeah,
anyway.
no. It's a good. I mean, I mean, one is that I think part of my job is to kind of like scope out like what are the next big questions that are within our mission. And so, one of the areas where we've been growing has been both technology and it's been assisted suicide. I think if you look at what's happening right now in Canada, and if you know about it, right, it is truly horrifying. It's now like the fourth leading cause of death. It's not just for people with like terminal illnesses. I mean,
It's
there's a story that
insane.
our other fellow in bioethics, Alexander Rakin, just wrote for Saraba Mari, his unheard like U.S. edition, and it's all about Canada. And there's this poor Canadian father who has like a 20-something-year-old daughter with autism, and she's been approved for medical assistance in death. Right, the euphemism for like they are
Oh
going
my
to allow
god.
this young lady to kill herself because she has struggles with autism. In no way is this like even if it was a terminal illness, I'm still against it because I think it's abandoning real solidarity with people with terminal illnesses. But even here, like this is in no way terminal. So part of this when I discovered he goes by Sasha. So when I discovered Sasha, I was like, you need to come to EPPC. He was more or less just like a freelance writer. I was like, we need to like set you up with some institutional support to grow your platform, to put you in touch with other colleagues at EPPC who are interested in this topic, because assisted suicide is the next big thing coming to the States. And, as we record this, New York State is debating it. And I believe, we're recording on a Wednesday. And I believe like the vote in the New York State Senate is today. And it would be terrible if New York approves physician-assisted suicide. So part of it is like scoping out, what are the next issues. When I first became president 4 years ago, um, we found Claire Morell, who was just like, a unique talent, another
She is.
unicorn.
She is.
She has a book coming out next month with Penguin Random House, right? All of my books have been like with conservative ghetto publishers. And I say that because they were the only ones who would publish me, right? I was publishing stuff on transgender issues before it was cool, the marriage debate, religious liberty debate, abortion, right? None of the big five publishers were going to touch those books, right? And so I'm very thankful for my conservative publishers. But, Claire has a book coming out with Penguin Random House. She also has had her model legislation signed into law in a number of states, all about like age verification for social media, for smart devices, for the App Store, things like this. And her book highlights all of the harms that these new technologies pose to children, and how the technology companies are bypassing parental authority. Um, for me, when I first brought Claire to EPPC, she had been serving in the first Trump administration at the Department of Justice. She had worked on the project on Section 230, and the big issue back then was censorship, right?
Can,
Because
can you
Trump had just
explain briefly what Section 230 is for the audience?
yes, sorry, I'm speaking in like DC shorthand for like policy wonk nerds. If I start using a bunch of acronyms, also,
Yeah, yeah,
so
yeah.
Section
No, that's
230,
it's yeah.
it's for the Communications Decency Act, and it more or less said that a publisher or a platform wouldn't have publisher liability if they're simply the conduit to someone else's speech, right? So there's a difference between like this is your own speech, in which case you might have liability, or you're publishing someone else's speech, or if you're just a platform for a third party speech, right? And so this was a way of saying that you would have certain good Samaritan provisions where you could remove objectionable content while still not being liable if some unobjectionable or some objectionable content that wasn't your own speech was on the internet. Um, so Claire had been working on that report during her time at DOJ, comes to us. Amazon bans my book right around the same time. And so like big tech censorship was on everyone's mind. A lot of people thought that, one of the reasons why the 2020 election went against Trump was because of big tech censorship with the New York Post story about Hunter Biden's laptop. They then kicked Trump off of Twitter. They then, banned my book on Amazon. And we're realizing, wait a minute, like consolidated corporate power can be as much of a threat to liberty and to equality and to justice as government power. So Claire initially was working on that. And then the more she dug into it, she said, wait, like the harms to kids are actually worse. She's a mom herself. She has three young children. So that's where she starts pivoting and starts working on this model legislation. and it's awesome, right? And I think she's had a major impact, both shaping the conversation and concretely getting legislation passed. And so for my job as president, it's identifying, all right, one of these next issues is technology. Thinking at first it was going to be tech censorship, and it still is that's important. And I'm very glad to see people like Andrew Ferguson and Mark Meter at the FTC and FCC, respectively, like going after some of the violators for antitrust law. Um, but then also it was great when like she and I made the decision we should pivot to like the human flourishing aspect of tech, because like the censorship is one part of a much larger conversation about how do these new technologies, especially with AI now, any day, the singularity we're approaching, like how do we think about human dignity, human identity, human flourishing in an age of large language models, right? And so I think, Claire's been at the cutting edge there. And actually, I think Claire and Aaron are going to have some interesting collaborations, because Aaron's very interested in this from like the medical doctor philosophical perspective. Claire's interested in this from like the harms to kids perspective. You put those things together, and you have some pretty interesting research projects. So my job is like game out. What are the next issues that no one else is preparing for? Who are the talented people who can do work in this space? And then another big part of my job is like, I have to raise the money for this, right? None of this, no one's working for free. We are running a charity in the IRS sense that a 501c3 is listed as a charitable organization, but like, we're not running a charity in the sense that, people are, volunteering their time. Like, Aaron has 5 kids, he needs a salary with healthcare benefits for the family, blah, blah, blah. Claire's this like, so there's a fundraising component, which at first I thought was going to be really a drag. And at times it can be, but at its best, it's like there are real, and this is something unique to America that, maybe
This
more
is very
foreign.
true.
Yeah. I mean, like just like the civil society space in the States is very different than,
Yes.
you're recording this from France right now. There are some really, really generous people in the States who also, like, I thought like they would be arrogant, they would have egos. Like some of them have that, but like the majority of our donors are like humble people who realize that they've been really successful in the business space. They don't necessarily have the skill set to be successful in the idea space or the political space or the ecclesial space, but they recognize that we have some talented people there, and they're like, this is how I partner to make a difference, right? I'm going to provide you guys with funding. I'm not going to micromanage it, because I know that when I was running my business, I had to trust my mid-level managers. Like, I'm going to trust you, your management team, your scholars. And so long as they like the final product, right? They don't meddle, which I love, because it's a different donor story. But like they do, it's a real partnership where they're like, I love what George Weigel is doing for the Catholic Church. I want to support that. I love what Aaron is doing for bioethics. I want to support that. I love, another one of our colleagues, Rachel Morrison. I love that she will read hundreds of pages of federal regulation to then stop the bad stuff and to help the good stuff out the door. Right. And they're like, I don't have that skill set. I don't even have the patience to read all of this federal code. I love that Rachel does. And, we now have a 4-person team working with Rachel on that project. And so another part of, what does a think tank president do is like, I go to foundations and to, individuals, and I say, look, these are the things that I know you care about. Let me show you a little bit about how we're making a real difference in these areas. And then I have to, ask them for money. And, I'm still like, it's,
Yeah.
but it is what it is. And I would say at its best, like there's some very generous people who want to help in this way. And I think
No, that's
it's unique
definitely
to
true.
America,
I
and
mean,
it's
yeah.
great.
Quick poll, because I like to ask people this question. As far as I know, every nonprofit president spends at least 50% of their time on fundraising. Would you say that's accurate?
No. So for me, like it's thankfully it has not been that high. And there's like some historical reasons for that we can
Damn.
discuss in a minute. For me, I would say it's about one third fundraising, one third management and like mentoring and coaching, and then dealing with like all sorts of back office headaches, things like that, and then one third of my own work. Like I've been pretty
Oh,
deliberate
wow.
in trying to carve out time so I can keep reading and writing and speaking, but it's only a third.
Can I be
When I
president of EPPC?
say that again,
Can I be president of EPPC? This
possibly.
is not what the average think tank presidents schedule looks like.
No. And so here's the historical reason. So like,
Usually they have to give up their research
no.
and spend more than half of their time in hotel rooms,
Yeah.
wooing
So
donors.
our historic business model, I think we are now the last think tank to have changed business models, which was, up until I became president, we were an eat what you kill think tank, which many of the
I'm
think
well aware.
no, I know, because like you lived under that old model. And so for people who have no idea what that means, is that like each
Yes, please
scholar
explain that.
each scholar was responsible for their own fundraising. And that was like very difficult for people who weren't yet famous. And so if you're George Weigel, you wrote the Pope's biography, you're like a household name within certain Catholic circles. Or if you're Ed Whalen, like one of Scalia's star clerks, you are the most prominent commentator on the courts. Um, you have greater facility with fundraising than if you're someone who's not yet well known, right? And so for me, if I
Yeah.
wanted to hire like
Yes.
next generation young people, who when I hired them, they were not superstars, but now 4 years later, I mean, you mentioned how Claire is, there are
Yeah,
people
Claire's a
who
good example. Now she's
wouldn't
very
have been able to
prominent.
get started, right? And so for me, like I had to start changing the business model, where I was like, all right, for people who the old model is working, I'm not going to mess it up. If you have foundation relationships, donor relationships, keep those going, right? And so we're going to, and we're going to keep working with the model that worked for the people for whom it worked. For people who were struggling under that old model, for new people, we're going to try to ramp up as much as possible. And we're still not there. I mean, like there are still people who are unpaid or underpaid at EPPC, just because it does take time. The reason it's not 50% of my time or 100% of my time is just that there's only so much you can do. Right? I mean, it's like
Right.
there's only a certain universe of potential donors for the type of stuff we do. Because if you think about for us, like you have to be a serious Protestant, Catholic, Jew, or fellow traveler, because like the issues that we work on and the viewpoint that we take, like a libertarian donor who is a secularist who is like in favor of abortion, like we're not going to be their favorite think tank, right? It's just like
Right.
that's right. But if you believe in like both markets and the right to life and the importance of the family, and you get these smaller and smaller Venn diagram concentric circles, and like that's my target audience. Like I want to find the foundations and the individuals who really share our largest worldview about the nature of the human person, human dignity, human flourishing, constitutionalism, rule of law, like all of the things, which means that there are only so many people who I can be talking to, right? There's certain people who I know, like we're never going to be high on their priority list, because there are other think tanks, other organizations
Right.
that are a better fit, just given who they are and what they care about.
Yeah, I mean, so a point you made about donors, which totally comports with my experience, is the fact that, you know, relative to what the average person's uh, prejudice might be, they're actually surprisingly not self-interested. They're as you described, they're people who've done very well in life, especially on the right. They're usually entrepreneurs, business people, and they genuinely want to do good with their money. And you can disagree with how they choose to spend their money. That's my criticism of
Sure.
conservative, which is could be a topic for a different podcast, and I'm not going to get you in trouble by dragging you into that conversation.
We can have that conversation over drinks when you're next in DC. Yeah.
Right. But I've never had a donor be like, "Ooh, I'm in lumber. How does this help, the lumber industry?"
Well,
Uh,
actually, with one qualification, I do think there is some corporate giving where there really is like a pay to play or a quid pro quo relationship, where it's the type
yeah.
of thing where it's like, we need to get rid of these tariffs. We'll donate some corporate
Right. I
money
mean,
for you guys to
that
do work.
exists. I'm
Yeah.
talking about,
For
like, conservative donors, like
yes.
people who might donate to EPPC or to other, like, big conservative nonprofits. In large part, I mean, like, they may have their corporation, which, like, gives money to lobbyists or whatever
Yeah.
to further the interests specifically of that corporation, and that's their First Amendment right. But in terms of their charitable giving as individuals, like, I've been in a lot of private conversations with people like that, and
Yes.
I've literally never had the experience of somebody being like,
Yep.
well, how does this help me with the regulation of this company I own or whatever. I
Yeah.
mean, you know
And let me just
also
add one
there.
thing to that. Like, I mean, I think it's partly like given the issues that you work on and focus on, the issues that we do at EPPC, there is literally nothing to gain, right? If you're a donor and you're
Well, yeah,
donating
certainly for
money,
a social conservative think tank.
yeah, I mean, like there can't, which just emphasizes the point that it's like purely because like they believe in the cause, right? We just did a big study on the safety risks of like chemical abortion. There is nothing that a donor has to gain personally by donating to the pro-life cause, right? You don't
Right,
get any
for
like
sure.
status, right? You don't get any fame, celebrity, and like it's certainly there's no economic interest in this. Like this is somehow going to like be a windfall for my company. It's purely because these donors like love the babies and they care about the
Yeah,
mothers.
yeah,
They
yeah.
want to donate this money. And I think you're exactly right. Just like I came in somewhat like skeptical or just like nervous about the fundraising aspect. And like, I've just been like over and over again struck by like, it's actually a really great group of people. And so I'm glad to hear that you've had the
No, no,
same,
genuinely.
yeah,
I would qualify that by saying, turkeys don't donate to the Thanksgiving Foundation, uh, and so, uh, like, if you so, when you're, if you're pitching something that's sort of like more against corporate power or more quote unquote, very big quotes, socialist, given that
right,
there's
right,
some kind of people who think that anything that's not like hardcore libertarian is socialist. But but I think there's a difference between, refusing to give money to something that you think will hurt you versus trying to help yourself under the guise of charity. And so
yes,
the former is sometimes, not always, there are a few class traders out there. There definitely are on the left, and there's a few on the right. But that's the distinction. But no, I've never been, I've um that's something that people may not expect about that world. They're people who they just they're patriots. They love their country. They love, in the case of pro life, they love babies. Um, okay, so
and even like on the tech stuff. I mean, think about this. Like, there are we have found like we have donors who are of the age where they have like teenage kids and they
right,
see how terrible like some of these smart devices, social media apps can be. And so, like, insofar as they have like something personally to gain by it, it's more or less just like they care about their kids and then their neighbor kids. And they're like, wow, like Claire's work has been so helpful to me as a mom or a dad. I want to amplify it. I want to supercharge what Claire
right,
is doing. So, like, the benefits I have received from her insights can reach more people. And so that's again, like, that's not a selfish
right,
motivation.
right, right.
That is a very altruistic. So, like, it's actually it's been really fun to like work with these people. Like, they're really good people.
Yeah, I can predict the comments that are going to be under there. Donor shills, billionaire shills. Yeah, okay,
We don't have,
fine.
yeah. I wish we had some
If you're a
billionaire
billionaire
donors.
watching this and you want me to shill you, you can find me and I will do it. Okay, so circling back. Okay, so something you said, and I can't resist following up. You said my job as president is to identify what's going to be like the next big issue. So what's going to be the next big issue?
um, I think AI and assisted suicide are I mean, to a certain extent, I'm not answering your question because like we've already identified those things and we're starting.
Right.
So beyond that, I don't yet know. But I, the two that we've identified that we've kind of ramped up for. First, it was like social media censorship. Then it was like kids in tech, and now I would say the next one is AI. And then for like the bioethics space, um, the chemical abortion project that we're currently in the midst of, um, it's now 2/3 of all abortion are via chemical abortion, right? It's not surgical abortion. And
Yeah.
so for us, it was like we need to think through what is a new innovative way. And for us, it was getting access to this insurance claims database and being able to actually do a rigorous analysis of the insurance claims, where what we found was we had over 865,000 insurance claims for chemical abortion, and 11% of the women experienced a severe adverse event. And so this was partly geared towards we have a moment in time right now with a MAHA movement of Make America Healthy, a Trump FDA, reinstate at the very least the safety protections that were originally FDA required for the abortion pill. And then end of life, I would say even within the pro-life movement, we're ready to talk about the unborn baby because the unborn baby is innocent. The unborn baby doesn't consent to be killed. But I think a lot of people at the end of life, and it's partly because of kind of like the American, like libertarian ethos of consenting adults should do whatever consenting adults want to do. If Pascal wants to die, and if Dr. Ryan wants to help kill him, why can't you and I have a free
I
market?
knew it. I knew it, Ryan.
But
I always suspected.
I fear that a lot of people, even in the pro life movement, aren't equipped for this
Yeah,
conversation because they've only been able to think about it as like innocent baby doesn't consent. And like consent is the master moral principle. But you consent to die. I consent to help you. We can have a free market exchange, right? I mean, if that's the framework that you are analyzing the issue from, you're going to get a certain answer. But if your framework is like, well, wait, what does this do to people on the peripheries, people with disabilities, people who are aging, people who are debilitated in various ways, people who already lack adequate health care, adequate health insurance, adequate familial and like civil society support? What happens to them? Right. So for every one, like, you know, 30 something year old or 40 something year old Pascal and Ryan who want to do this, how many people who aren't like upper middle class, otherwise healthy, otherwise like successful individuals are going to be pressured into this because they already are marginalized by our culture? What will this do to
absolutely.
like the profession of medicine? Right? If all of a sudden, I mean, there's a reason why the Hippocratic Oath historically, and it's been watered down, but like historically, the original Hippocratic Oath, OG, I will not give a deadly drug to any of my patients. Right. And there was a recognition that like medicine is
Yes.
not like a morally neutral technique, right? It's a profession, which means like professionals profess vows, right? And for medicine, like what they professed was a commitment to healing and to health. And when all of a sudden you view it as like a morally neutral technique where I can like jab you with a syringe and push down the plunger, and it could be filled with medicine or it could be filled with poison. And this is just like another, like the image that Leon Cash used was I'm a hired syringe, right? That's a very different vision of
Oof.
medicine. And it'll be a different vision of healthcare funding because assisted suicide is a lot cheaper than hospice or
Oh,
palliative care.
absolutely.
And so anyway, like I mean, one of the things that like I've tried to do in some of my own work on this issue, and now unfortunately, because I only have a third of my time rather than 100% of my time, I've hired people who can work on this. Is that we need to enlarge in the sphere of considerations when we think about what physician assisted suicide do to change our culture, our medicines, our families, our economics, because it's not simply going to be you and I having a spot market exchange, right? They're going to be ecological impacts that really change a lot about society
Oh,
once killing
absolutely.
grandma becomes routine, and
Yeah.
it's becoming routine, and that should be horrifying.
Yeah, I mean, it's so much to say about this. There's this a great guy who I tried to interview for this podcast, but he didn't have time. But maybe we'll do it. The bill that just passed in Britain, and now
Mm.
they're trying to pass the same bill in France. So his name is Yuan Yitsu. I'm hoping I pronounced that correctly. He's a Canadian. He's a law professor, but he did, I believe, his doctorate in Oxford. So he was following stuff in Britain, and he tracked the progress of the legislation. And basically, the opposition did something intelligent, which they tried to bring forward a lot of constructive amendments. So, like, how many people need to sign off on this? Who can sign off on this? How are the criteria defined in the law, and so on and so forth? And you see all of these amendments that are rejected, and you realize, oh, no, the goal really is like to just maximize the number of bodies. The goal is to maximize the number of people killed. And this has also, speaking of socialism earlier, this has also radicalized me about socialized medicine, because it is about money. Like, the UK has the most expensive healthcare system in the world, the most socialized healthcare system outside of North Korea and Cuba, and they're explicitly saying, oh, this is going to save us a bunch of money. And anyway,
And there's
so
another aspect of this. As the baby boomers start retiring and declining, and because of marriage and familial and childbearing trends, many of them
right.
are navigating their decline more or less alone. Whereas, like, historically, the family was how we shouldered each other's burdens. There's a great essay that I always quote when I speak on this, like in a full lecture context, by Gil Meilander, the Lutheran theologian, ethicist. Where the title, it was in First Things back in like the late 1990s. I want to burden my loved ones. And what
I
he's saying
remember
there,
that.
that like, look, when I grow old, a lot of people say, oh, I don't want to burden my loved ones. He's like, no, I want to burden them, because that's the entire point of life. It's shouldering one another's burdens. And when they were kids, they
That's
burdened me.
beautiful.
Like the middle of the night, diaper changes, when they get older and they're sick in the middle of the night and they're throwing up. When, like, I think if I remember correctly, he's like, I went to their band concerts, and that was a burden, because like the seventh grade band was not good. But as a father, like, it was important for me to be there. And like, and he's like, at the end of life, the attitude should not be, I don't want to burden my loved ones. It's like, I am going to be a burden, and my loved ones are precisely the ones who I want to burden. And I think for a lot of people, like, the temptation would be, oh, my mom and dad, as they age, oh, they're such a burden. Can we just get rid of them? And we need to resist that temptation, right? The temptation should be, I have a great opportunity to show love to my mom and dad the same way that they loved me when I was a child, and we loved each other when we were both at the peak of our lives. And now, as they decline, like, my duty, my obligation, like what virtue requires of me, is to rise to the occasion, right? And I think a lot of people, both somewhat between by like Social Security and Medicaid, they view it as like the government's responsibility, not their responsibility. And then I think assisted suicide will further say, well, look, mom, dad, wouldn't it just be easier for you if you know, went in for the death pod, right? And so there's a lot there, but it's a big issue. It's coming. I don't
Yeah,
think
yeah,
most
yeah. And
Americans are ready for
it's
it.
coming to the US. There's, I try not to be too conspiracy minded, but there's something really bizarre about the way that it's popping up in all these countries at the same time. That it seems to be pushed for no emergency. There's no emergency, right? Especially France has been considered for many, many decades. In the 90s, it passed a very Catholic inspired bill about sort of end of life issues that was considered a sort of model globally, sort of striking a balance between banning positively euthanasia and what I don't know what the English equivalent of that phrase is, but it's from Catholic theology, acharnement thérapeutique, so uh, artificially keeping someone
Yeah.
alive
Mhm.
beyond the point where
Yep, yep. Where it's disproportionate. Yeah. Yep.
and France was known for having some of the best palliative care in the world, and so there's literally no reason to do this except to save money or to you know uh, appease some interest. I've become really radicalized on this. I mean, as you
Good.
know, I lost my father earlier this year. I've lost all four of my grandparents now, including my grandmother last year. Um, and you know, one of the things that I've seen as people sort of take on this journey, which we now can manage in terms of the pain and the discomfort. We have that technology, and we understand that really well.
Yep. And it's not
Um,
pain that's motivating. It's like autonomy.
yes, yes.
Yes.
And as people get closer, they change because once, I mean, obviously it helps if you're a Christian, but some people become Christian, or some people find God in a way, even if they're not explicitly Christian. They sort of get rid of all of the BS of life. That's what it's about. Like you're facing your maker, you're facing the end. And so and the illness is sort of part of that process of sort of getting stripped of all of the BS, all of the irrelevant stuff of life that we're all obsessed with, money, status, blah blah
Because you
blah.
can't take any of that with you.
And you can't take any of that with you. And like people change at the end. People have a sort of transformation. It's a journey that we all have to do, unless we die sort of violently or whatever. But it's part of the journey of life, and it's good to have for people to do the entire journey.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've really become convinced that of this. The more I watch, the more I watch or see people I know die as I grow older. Really, the more I've become sort of radicalized about this, and the more deeply I've become convinced of this, and for reasons that are not explicitly religious. I mean, everything I've just said sort of makes more sense from a religious perspective because, of course, the end of the journey is also the beginning of a new one. But you know like my grandmother had a beautiful death. She was 92. She had the time to sort of, we had the time to know, so we could all see her. She saw my daughter, so her great granddaughter. uh and she died at home surrounded by her loved ones. Like, it was it I mean, it was the death she wanted. And so anyway, I don't want to
Well,
get
also,
too
let me just
personal
highlight
or
something you
weepy, but
let me just highlight something you said there. You said that your grandmother had a beautiful death. I think that phrase and the concept that that phrase signifies is foreign to a lot of our contemporaries
yes, yeah,
because we've overly medicalized and institutionalized and sterilized death that a lot of people don't have any firsthand experience with it. And the idea that death could be beautiful is just it will sound strange to a lot of people. There's a great book by a medical doctor at Columbia, Lydia Dugal, titled "The Lost Art of Dying," and we've kind of
yeah.
shielded both birth and death from ordinary people. Birth
And
takes place at a
this
hospital, death takes place at a hospital, and life is just in between those events. But those events historically used to be like the whole village was involved
right,
at both
right,
the very
right.
beginning and the very end, and the concept of there being beauty and tranquility and peace. Um, that's hard to do when there's a lot of bleep bleep bleeps and like you're
Yeah.
hearing the monitor and there are the bright lights and like all the rest, right? And so um, anyway, it's it just strikes me that like that we may need there was a beautiful book that Father Newhouse wrote when he had his first cancer bout titled "As I Lay Dying," and it's based on the John Donne, or the title is borrowed from the John Donne poem. But like, I think not just our opposition to assisted suicide, but like it may be that we have to like, as Saint Paul says, let me show you a more excellent way, like on both the natural level and the supernatural level, like help people see that there is something beautiful in the alternative. And you just spoke about it really really profoundly, and yeah.
Well, thank you. That was totally not premeditated. I wanted to talk about like political stuff, but this issue gets me riled up because and there's this entire conspiracy of silence where, it happened in Canada. There, well, it happened in Belgium and the Netherlands first,
Yeah.
where they're just like killing people, like children, the handicapped. I mean, it is the most dystopian stuff imaginable, and I don't know anybody who's for that. Like, I don't know. I've never. I know people who are not religious, who are progressive, and so on and so forth. Like, do you support killing a preteen girl in a wheelchair without telling her parents first, which is something that happened in the Netherlands? They're like, of course not. That's horrible. That's Nazi shit. But there's this conspiracy of silence whereby, it doesn't it doesn't stick, and so country A does it. It goes. It's a catastrophe. Country B does it. The same thing happens. Country C does it. The same thing happens.
Yep.
And
Yep. Yep.
and so
Yep.
it just happened to the UK. It's happening now in France, and I certainly believe you that they will try in the US.
Yeah.
It's just infuriating.
Yep.
Let's talk about something else.
Yeah.
We've got a few minutes left. So tell me. So okay. So the pretext for this interview is your annual report. Like, what's the one thing from last year, apart from assisted suicide,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
you're most proud of, or that you think reflects? I'm sorry, I'm asking you to pick between your children.
Yeah. I'm not gonna. That is too hard to answer. Uh, or maybe actually, maybe I'll answer it this way. Like, I think another thing that EPPC is really well known for and that I'm proud of are like our scholars publish books, and we still publish books even in an era where fewer and fewer people read. And you and I were chatting about this before we hit the record button here. Um, I am happy by the fact that our scholars are capable of doing both like the 250-page version of the argument and the 280 or the 240, whatever the character count currently is on text. Obviously it's now unlimited, but to get the previewed version, being able to speak in both registers. And if you look at the annual report, there's a page of like all the books that are listed. There are going to be even more books
I
in
remember that page.
2025, and they're impressive books. Like they're books that people actually read. They're not just like books that are self-published or something like this. Um, and I think that gives us like an intellectual credibility that's not like the haughty, we just do knowledge for knowledge's sake, look how smart we are. But it's like we've done our homework, so then we can actually do the white paper, we can do the model legislation, we can do the testimony at a congressional hearing, we can serve on commissions, things like that. Um, what's unique about this year's annual report is that we structured it partly like without being explicit about this. The motivation was the Life of Julia ad. And I imagine some of your
Really?
listeners will remember that during the Obama years, they made this stupid animated video.
It's starting to be old.
Yeah, no, it's now a decade old. And it
Zoomers will not remember
not
this.
remember that it was all of the ways that like the Obama administration had helped this pseudonymous Julia from cradle to grave. And,
Yeah, and
at
she was
no
always
point.
alone.
Yeah, and there was like no father, there was no husband. It was like the federal government was the
Your
intermediary, and we were like,
father, your
oh,
mother, your children, your friends. Yeah.
yep. And our vision is like the exact opposite. Like, yes, we believe there's a role for the state and a role for public policy, but it's more going to be like all these civil society institutions. And so we went from like cradle to grave of here's how we're defending human dignity and promoting human flourishing for the unborn,
That's very
for
smart,
marriage and the family,
clever.
for education reform, and not just school choice, because everyone else does school choice. Like we actually want to reform the government run schools because
That's
85,
very
90%
important.
of Americans go to the government run schools, for technology, for medicine, for the constitutional order, judges, and the administrative states, for political parties when we get to Henry Olson's work in politics, right? And so, and then end of life. And so it really was like an arc of here are all of the vectors where like human dignity is really on the line, and here's the work that we're doing to defend it. And so it was a nice way. This is the first year. This is the fourth annual report that I've been president for that we've produced, and it was the first year where we did it with this narrative arc of let's walk through the life cycle of an individual and see how from cradle to grave our work is making a difference to defend this person's dignity. And so anyway, so I was also happy with that because it gave me like a new way of explaining your opening question was what makes EPPC unique, right? We're focused on like human nature questions more so than taxes and trade or foreign policy. Obviously those things matter, but like we're living at a unique moment in time where like the very concept of human nature and the human person is up for debate. And they're radically different visions of what it means to be human. And that tends to be like our sweet spot.
Well, that's a good that's as good as any for a place to end. I wanted to talk to you about your report about the abortion pill. I wanted to talk about your report about IVF
Yeah,
and
yeah.
reproductive. I forget the name of the thing, but I found that
Restorative
report
reproductive
fascinating,
medicine.
as you
Natalie
know.
Dodson has done great work. Great work.
Um,
Yeah.
but we're running out of time, so we have a traditional question that we end each interview with. Um, so recommend a book. Can be any book. You old fiction, nonfiction that's not in your area of expertise, and I'm going to make it harder for you. That's not published by EPPC or by somebody written
Oh.
by working for EPPC.
All right. So this is also, it depends what counts as my area of expertise, but you know, a book that I'm currently reading, I've read most of these essays. It's by Russell Hittinger, who's the Catholic social thought scholar, and it's a collection of his essays on Catholic social thought. And the title is
That
"On the Dignity."
I'm sorry,
Not
I'm
too
going to
much in my
overrule
area of
that. That's
expertise.
cheating. You've got you've got a philosophy doctorate from Notre Dame. That
Yeah.
I'm sorry, you're cheating, Mr. Anderson. You're cheating.
All right. All right.
Come up with something better.
All right. But here's the problem. I would say almost everything recently that I've been reading, you're going to say is within my area of expertise.
Well,
Um,
that's the problem if you study philosophy, which is everything is in your area of
yeah, but
expertise.
I mean, even like like so, I've read Jonathan
Very
Haidt's
French
book,
problem.
which I thought was very good. It's not Abigail Schreier's book, Bad Therapy, Haidt's book, Anxious Generation, like um, Tim Carney's book, America Unfriendly. Like I think you're going to say that all of these things are like you know in my expertise enough. So I don't know if I have a book outside of my expertise, but Russ Hittinger's book is very good. Abigail Schreier's book, Bad Therapy, Tim Carney's book, America Unfriendly, Haidt's book, Anxious Generation. I imagine both of you
Okay,
have already
fine.
read these things. Yeah.
I'll allow that. I'll allow that. That's 5 books, and they're all
In
sort
my
of,
area. Yeah.
you replace quality with quantity. Quantity has a
Oh,
quality all on its
they're
own.
all quality books too.
No, they're good. They're good books for the ones that I know about. And I did an interview with Tim about his book.
Good, good.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. All right. Well, thank you very much for your time. This was a lot of fun. This was very interesting. I hope the first part gave people more of an insight on like what a think tank actually is and what it does and how it runs. And then I hope they weren't too put off by hearing me rant about assisted suicide, and I certainly hope it changed their mind
If they were.
if that's what this interview does in the end. All right, thank
Good.
you.
Yeah, thank you.